Andrew Urquhart with you on the program today. Earlier this week, the State of the Nation report was issued by the Salvation Army, in particular the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit of the Salvation Army, looking at 5 key areas. How are we doing as a nation? What's some of the good news? What's some of the bad news of where we're at, particularly as we look at some of those people on the margins of our society who are perhaps not doing as well, and what are some of the social policies that are affecting outcomes for those people? Joining me on the program, a couple of gentlemen from the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit. Firstly, the Director of that unit, Lieutenant Colonel Ian Hudson. Ian, kia ora, good morning.
Kia ora. It's good to be here.
Also, Paul Barber, who is the Senior Social Policy Analyst. Paul, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, kia ora, and good to be part of this. Thanks.
First up, Ian, if you could unpack a little bit about the report. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it, and we're not going to get through all of the details. We'll try and cover as much as possible, but basically looking at 5 key areas, some research, some measures in these areas. Give us an overview.
Yeah, maybe to start with a theme that we've taken this year, which is Ngā Tukunga Iho, which is the things we inherit, because we realise we're at a sort of a marking point. Our nation is at a point of change. We've got different government coming in, and in a way we're looking back at things that have evolved that don't really relate to what they're about to attempt.
Yep.
But also it's a kind of inheritance that we've got, and we're wanting to focus on things that work, that have been working, but also pointing out where things aren't working and hoping that the government will be, along with all of us, of course, will be looking to try and turn things around on those kind of areas.
Yep.
So that's kind of the theme of the report, trying not to just look at the negative or the positive, but to see the whole picture.
I suppose this is a benchmark, and for the new coalition government, their opportunity to do better in the areas that we're not doing quite so good in. Though these 5 key areas, I mean, this is something that you've been doing for a few years now, but measuring compared to where we were this time last year.
That's right, and the 5 key areas are children and young people. There's social hazards, work and incomes, crime and punishment, housing. I think I said 5 then, didn't I?
Certainly.
If I've missed anyone else. But basically, we've been doing that now. By the way, this is our 17th report. And so we've seen what's happened over a long period of time. And those are the 5 areas that we've focused on. And this report is no exception in that respect.
Jumping into some of those specifics there, and Paul, wanting to bring you in on this one. When it comes to work and incomes, of course, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and I mean that affects all of us, especially those on lower income or perhaps out of work.
Yeah, that's one of the strong and abiding themes out of this past year, is that rising cost of living, how it's impacting on lower income households particularly. And I think that's what we always got to remember, that's where the impact falls hardest. And what's been quite striking in the past year, for instance, is the rise in food insecurity, for example. We've seen, in the Salvation Army, we faithfully count and report every year how many food parcels we've distributed, and the number increased by 40% last year to 92,000. And that's after a couple of years, the previous couple of years, we've seen decreases and signs we'd hope for some improvement around food insecurity. But also we've seen data from the Health Survey that's shown the households who report running out of food often or sometimes has increased also sharply in the past year. So that's families with children going without food, and that number's gone back up over to 1 in 5 families reporting they're running out of food. So that is one example of how those hardships have been playing out in our communities.
Certainly, any other organisation, a 40% increase would be fantastic. I mean, Fletcher Building would love those results of this week. But, I mean, a clear indicator that some families are doing it tough. On the positive, though, continuing to be low unemployment in New Zealand?
Yes, I think that's one of the intriguing things that's going on in our society now, is that we're coming off 2 years of very, very low unemployment, so sustained low unemployment. In 2023, we started to see a bit of a turn with unemployment rising, but actually the level of employment, that is the number of people in work, kept growing as well. So the unemployment was, and that's partly because our population grew very, very fast last year in 2023, and that meant more people coming into the country, more people coming to work. But also, we're seeing a turn point now, and we've seen unemployment increase, and that's one of those concerning signs for people ahead for hardship and poverty. An increase of 22,000 in those number of people officially unemployed, and in fact, when we add together the group of people that are called the potential labour force, those who would like a job but aren't actively looking, it's over 200,000 now. And
wow.
So, it's going. But I mean, the positive side is that there's still quite a bit of resilience there. But the predictions are for unemployment to keep rising to reach 4% at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Could hit 5% during this year, and that means another 30,000 or more people becoming unemployed. But that's really not something and that's going to impact most the communities we work with.
Yep.
So that's I'm afraid the mixed message again, that although we had strong employment, the clouds are gathering.
Yeah, certainly. And important to look at this in terms of people, actually, because you can say, 4% unemployment, isn't that great news? But we're talking about tens of thousands of families who are doing it tough. And if anything, the overview of this report, yes, we're talking statistics, but Ian, bringing you in on this, we're talking about people, we're talking about families who are doing it tough at the moment.
We are, and that's the sobering thing. I mean, we see in our centres people coming in. I was presenting the State of the Nation report in Manukau yesterday, and as I arrived, I saw a lineup outside of our food bank of people just waiting to be seen, and it was rather sobering to be walking in to present the State of the Nation report in Manukau.
Yeah.
To seeing that kind of a line outside there, people sort of waiting, almost look abject, and it's
really tough circumstances.
It's not what you want to see.
No, certainly not. That's the unfortunate reality of the situation. I just also wanted to talk to you about, talking work and incomes, but talking about some of the things people are doing with their income. When it comes to social hazards such as alcohol use and gambling, again, a rise in perhaps this unfortunate part of our society as people are struggling to cope with the pressures on their lives.
Yeah, well, in these social hazard sides, there was some good news in that some statistics were pointing to a drop in the level of alcohol consumption across a number of groups, which and hazardous drinking. That was really welcomed. I mean, it wasn't huge, and we wouldn't like anyone to think that we felt that enough had been done there, because it's a serious issue. And the same thing with illicit drugs. The amount of use of illicit drugs has dropped, but again, it wasn't huge. But I mean, obviously, any drop is a good thing.
It's better than growth in that area. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other side of things, the gambling, while it's been good to see local communities, particularly in the vulnerable areas, doing all they can to reduce the number of poker machines, which is the most harmful of the forms of gambling. It's been coming down, but the expenditure, or the loss, if you want to call it that, is increasing. So each machine is taking more money, and so in the end, the actual dollars lost is more, and so that's concerning. I don't have a real quick answer to how we fix that, but obviously we need to be working hard to try to see that that doesn't keep growing.
Looking at the different aspects of the report, Ian, we were talking before about some of the social hazards, things which, whilst they're not illegal in New Zealand necessarily, aren't good for us, things like gambling and alcohol use. Bit of a mixed bag in that regard. And I think this is true for all aspects of the report. Some good news and some bad news. That's certainly the case for crime and punishment as well.
Yes, I have to say that in crime and punishment area, it's mainly not good news.
Yeah.
Although one good piece of news is that the number of people reoffending has reduced significantly, and that has to be really good news, because we really have been concerned about the way that people go through the prison system and they reoffend at such huge levels that it proves that prisons aren't the answer. But at least in this case, they're still too high a level, but
Yes.
Less of them are reoffending. Around 40% of those that reoffend in the first year, which is down from what it used to be. So that's one piece of good news.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, the rest of it doesn't look that great, with nearly across all kinds of ways that we measure crime. And one key way we do that is looking at adults experiencing crime, and the number of offences have gone up considerably, but nearly every way you measure it, it's gone up in some measure from last year. And what is causing that is hard to determine.
Yeah.
I'll maybe say something about that in a second, but along with that, the prison population is going up, even though a lot of that is in relation to the remand, people on remand who haven't yet been to trial. The numbers of people who are waiting for trial has increased, so that's helped bump the prison population up.
I mean, we're looking at these in different areas, but there's so much overlap between these five distinct areas. And I suppose when it comes to crime and punishment, desperate people do desperate things. That the state of poverty in society results in not only social hazards, drug and alcohol abuse, but also crime in some instances. I mean,
Yes.
Not always the same causal link, but generally, is that what's happening here, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think to some extent, all of us wonder what causes crime. And I guess one of the things we're really concerned about is the noise that's out there at the moment about being tough on crime.
Yeah.
And these stats in some ways might seem to some people that that's the answer is, we need to be tough on crime and that'll sort it out. But with complex problems, all of us want a simple response. I mean, some of the things we're seeing are quite upsetting, and all of us would like a simple response, but in many respects it can be more harmful than good. And the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, I mean, it connects to the social hazards, as you say.
Yeah.
One example of what I think needs to happen is, if you look at domestic violence, one of the key contributors to domestic violence is alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a proactive way of, at least, I'm not suggesting that's a be-all and answer for everything, but it's just one example of one thing that could be done to reduce domestic violence, is to actually tighten up our regulation around alcohol, stop the number of stores in marginalised communities, stop the the way it's advertised profusely and provided everywhere. It saturates our society, and if we could do something about that, that would be one way we could help at least try to reduce the amount of violence that occurs within domestic violence. And so, I mean, there's a lot of causal factors, and it's not absolutely clear why this year it's gone up.
Yeah.
But what we would say, we don't think that it's tough on crime. It's a very one-size-fits-all answer, which isn't an answer.
Well, this is certainly something which we will see, and this is what I very much value with the State of the Nation report. We had a change of government. We've got some new policies in this area. and the statistics will show whether or not the new policies, the new approach to crime and punishment will make any difference, or whether things will continue to slide in that regard. Wanting to talk about another area, and Paul, bringing you in on this one, because I suppose anecdotally, if not statistically, we've seen an increase in young people not in school but involved in criminal activity. What does your research show, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, there are connections across all these areas, and one of the really troubling parts of our report this year is looking at the level of violence is actually towards children. So we've seen a rise in violent crime generally, and that's reflecting also in violence towards children. And people have been asking me, and actually it'd be a good thing to be looking more at, does that include violence between children, like other children assaulting others? So those are some of the questions that come out of that time. But yeah, if we look at and if we look at kind of the stresses that are on families and on communities, they come across in multiple settings, and we talk a bit about housing later, but incomes. We've mentioned, the people finding the hardship is putting pressure on them, and these things are connected. And if we look at the levels of poverty that households with children face, those things are connected.
This is one of the, of course, the major policies of the previous Labour government was reducing childhood poverty. We're essentially looking back at these results are based on previous government policies. Is there any good news in that space? Has there been a reduction in child poverty in the last year, Paul?
Well, that's absolutely one of the things that we want to really highlight in this year's report is the work around child poverty that has happened over the past years. This is a decade-long issue for our country, and turning it around doesn't happen overnight. In 2018, legislation was passed, supported by all the main parties in Parliament, called the Child Poverty Reduction Act. And out of that has flown a whole stream of work around measuring child poverty better, developing strategies to respond to that, and above all, increasing the assistance and help that families need to lift children out of poverty. And it has worked. We've seen tens of thousands of children lifted out of poverty. Poverty rates and the numbers of children in poverty are lower. Were lower in 2022, the most recent statistics we have, than they were 5 years earlier when this work began. Next week, the child poverty figures for 2023 get released, and we'll be interested to see where that's gone. But it doesn't take anything away from the reality that poverty has been reduced, that while hardship is still far too high and we're a long way from the goals that we want to achieve, but progress was made by making decisions about how we do our welfare support, about ensuring people, if they are in employment, earn a reasonable income, and increasing the hardship assistance to families, like, for instance, programs like food in schools. The new government has made it really clear that they're committed to continuing to reduce the child poverty rates, and we want to see from them their clear plan about how they want to get there. And we'll be really actively supporting what can be done to achieve that.
Still in a housing crisis in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and some doing better than others in this regard. Paul, if I can come to you on this one, they've built a lot of houses in the last 12 months, but there's also been a significant increase in population from immigration, which probably cancels out those gains.
Yes, that's one of those key messages for us out of this year's work on the housing is we are continuing to build houses at record levels in this country, but the number has actually started reducing again, the number of new builds that are consented, which is the measure we use, just at the time when our population has grown more rapidly than it has for decades. And so we do this sort of rough and ready measure in the report, and it looks at the growth in population and then compares that to the number of consents. And if there's enough houses being built, more houses being built than population growing, then we've got a plus. And if there's fewer, then there's a minus. And if we look back, we had 2 years during the COVID time when not many people were coming into the country. There was a big plus. We carried on building houses, and we caught up some of that deficit in housing supply. But this year we've gone back into deficit as the number of people coming in, the growth of population generally has been more than exceeds the amount of housing we build. And that's been the case actually in 7 of the last 10 years. So yeah, that's a pressure on housing supply. That's one of the factors that leads to pressure further down for people in the housing market who are renting and looking for a place to live. You've got more people looking for places.
There has been a significant increase in the amount of social housing units built, but something I saw the other day actually, which I found was interesting when it comes to demand for social housing, perhaps the way in which we do housing has changed. High demand for people looking for one-room apartments instead of living in community, lots of people living perhaps more isolated than previously. Is that a factor?
Again, the makeup of the households, the people looking for housing is certainly changing, and that makes it hard for the housing supply that's already there to be matched properly to the size of the household, the families. And you do hear that story. I mean, we've got a mix because there are people looking for larger houses too. We've got larger families and households needing social housing. They might have quite a number of children, for instance, so a number of people in the household. That is one of the pressures, but in reality, it's more about the simple lack of quality housing, lack of affordability, and it's really most people that we're talking about here in the lower incomes are renters. You're not in the market to buy a house, and as we look in the State of the Nation report at rents and low, traditionally sort of working class, perhaps lower income communities. And we look at the rents, the lower quartile rents here, and some of those places have gone up by more than 15% just in the last year. Now that's a huge hole in a family's income, and over recent years they've risen enormously, in some areas more than 100%.
And of course, when we compare those things, when grocery prices are going up, when housing costs are going up, then families are getting squeezed in the middle. Just as we wrap up our conversation today, something which began, I understand, a couple of years ago, a comparison in terms of outcomes in these 5 areas between Māori and non-Māori. Ian, back to you, if I may. In what you see with the Salvation Army, with the people that are coming to you for help, Māori disproportionately represented in those statistics?
Yes, they definitely are. Around somewhere just over 40% of the people that come to us are Māori, and they don't usually come to us because life is easy.
No.
They're usually struggling, and so that's why we thought it was really important to incorporate that into our report. And we see that there's some negative things that have happened in that report. One of the really positive things we saw happening, though, in the educational attainment, that is not so much overall in the mainstream schools, but it's a pointer in a way to what we would hope could happen more widely, and that is in the schools where te reo is the primary mode of teaching, or it is used. Those particular Māori students have done as well as mainstream schools, whereas the ones that are in mainstream schools have really done very poorly. In fact, for the first time, the Māori in primary te reo schools have been slightly better than the rest of New Zealand in their responses, and it just really points to the idea that Māori for Māori kind of approaches to a whole lot of these issues that we see is the way to go. And I mean, in many ways, we've been having this discussion around te tiriti, and in a way, that's what it all comes back to a little in these individual cases. So looking along, there's other things there that are positive and negative, but really sitting behind it all is involvement of Māori in working out their way to thrive in our society. And so we were really encouraged, at least by one key thing, and that's an education as a pointer to what we'd like to see across the board.
Certainly there is some encouragement in the report. Some of it, of course, makes some sobering reading because, hey, we haven't finished yet. There are still some aspects of our society which are broken. but I very much appreciate the mahi, the work that you do in bringing these statistics together so that we can tell the difference between what works and what doesn't work, what might be a slogan that will get you elected but not necessarily make a difference for the people that policy affects or represents. Thank you so much for the work that you've done in putting this together and for the work that you continue to do through the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit. Ian, Paul, thank you for your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thanks for having us.